Move over. You in there?
Y'all, we are having so much fun out here in our yard. Best Mother's Day ever. Y'all, this is our Mother's Day weekend. Go, Mimi, go. Go, girl. Come on, Kayla.
A trembling voice cuts through the silence of a Fort Worth evening. We both shot each other. The caller gasps into his phone, his words barely audible between labored breaths. We both have guns. We both shot each other. The 911 dispatcher's training kicks in, but nothing could prepare her for what she's hearing. In the background, chaos. Sirens already screaming toward a suburban home where something unthinkable has just occurred. When emergency responders arrive, they find a scene that defies explanation. Shannon Michelle Lacy, 39, lies motionless. Multiple gunshot wounds ending the life of a devoted mother of 3. Her husband, Jessic, clings to life, his own injuries testament to a confrontation that crossed every line. But this isn't a story about strangers. This isn't about a random act of violence or a break-in gone wrong. This is about a marriage that somehow led 2 people to draw weapons on each other in their own home. How does love transform into mutual destruction? What drives a couple to the point where both reach for guns? The answer lies buried beneath carefully crafted social media posts and the private struggles that no one saw coming. If you're ready to uncover the truth behind the perfect online marriage, make sure you're subscribed, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about domestic relationships. Shannon Michelle Lacy carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, and she made it look effortless. At 39, she embodied everything a community admires: resilience, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to her 3 children that defined every choice she made. Her days started before dawn and ended long after her children were asleep. 2 demanding jobs kept her moving constantly, but Shannon never complained. As both primary caregiver and sole breadwinner, she understood that her family's stability rested entirely on her shoulders. Friends described her as the kind of person who would give her last dollar to help someone else, even when she couldn't afford to. She was always smiling, remembers a neighbor who often saw Shannon loading her children into the car for school. Even when you could tell she was exhausted, she had this warmth about her. She'd wave and ask how your day was going, genuinely caring about the answer. Shannon's social media reflected a woman who found joy in small moments: her children's achievements, family gatherings, quiet evenings at home. Her posts showed a mother celebrating report cards, cheering at school events, and creating memories despite limited resources. The photos captured genuine happiness, real moments of connection with her kids. But behind those moments lay a grinding reality that few people witnessed. Financial pressures mounted daily, bills that couldn't wait, groceries stretched to last the week. The constant juggling act of making ends meet while ensuring her children never felt the burden of their circumstances. Shannon worked as a caregiver for elderly clients and picked up shifts at a local restaurant. Between jobs, she attended parent-teacher conferences, helped with homework, and maintained the household that served as her family's sanctuary. Her children came first, always. Their needs, their futures, their happiness, everything else was secondary. Those who knew Shannon best spoke of her dreams. She wanted her children to have opportunities she never had. She talked about saving for their college education, about family vacations they'd take someday when money wasn't so tight. She believed in delayed gratification, in working now for a better tomorrow. Shannon was the strongest person I knew, said a coworker. She never let you see her struggle, but you could tell she was carrying so much. She'd talk about her kids with such pride, such hope. They were her everything. Her strength extended beyond her family. Shannon served as an informal counselor for friends going through difficult times, offering practical advice and emotional support. She understood hardship intimately and used that knowledge to help others navigate their own challenges. The contrast between Shannon's public presence and private reality wasn't deception, it was protection. She shielded her children from adult worries while maintaining the image of stability they needed. Her social media posts weren't lies. They were the moments of genuine joy she created despite overwhelming pressure. Shannon represented something powerful in her community, proof that love and determination could overcome almost anything. She demonstrated daily that being a good mother didn't require perfect circumstances, just perfect commitment. Her story should have been one of triumph over adversity, of a woman whose sacrifices eventually paid off. Instead, it became something else entirely. June 1st, 2022 started like countless other days in the Lacy household. Shannon prepared for another demanding day, juggling her responsibilities while Jessic remained home. His music career still more aspiration than income. But something was different that Wednesday. The tension that had been building for months was about to reach a breaking point. Financial pressures had intensified, bills were overdue, and Shannon's 2 jobs weren't stretching far enough to cover their family's needs. The burden of being the sole provider was crushing her, while Jessic's inability to contribute meaningful income created a growing divide between them. By afternoon, their conversation had shifted from discussion to argument. Neighbors later recalled hearing raised voices through the walls of the Fort Worth home, something that had become increasingly common in recent weeks. What started as another disagreement about money and responsibility was escalating into something far more serious. They were really going at it, remembered one neighbor who lived close enough to hear the commotion. It wasn't just regular arguing. There was anger in those voices, real anger. The argument centered on familiar themes that had been poisoning their relationship for months. Jessic's frustration with his failed music ambitions, Shannon's exhaustion from carrying the entire financial load, the growing resentment on both sides that had been festering beneath their public image of marital stability. As evening approached, their dispute reached a fever pitch. The voices grew louder, more desperate. Both Shannon and Jessic had reached the point where years of accumulated stress and disappointment were exploding into something neither could control. What happened next defied every expectation of how domestic arguments typically unfold. Instead of one person becoming violent while the other sought safety, both Shannon and Jessic made the same terrible decision. Both retrieved firearms. The presence of guns in their home transformed a heated argument into a potential tragedy. In that critical moment, when emotions were running highest and judgment was most clouded, deadly weapons became part of their confrontation. The first gunshot shattered the evening quiet, sending neighbors scrambling for cover and reaching for their phones. But it wasn't followed by silence. More shots rang out, evidence that both Shannon and Jessic were firing. The exchange was brief, but devastating. Multiple gunshots echoed through the residential neighborhood as 2 people who had once promised to love and protect each other engaged in mutual combat with deadly consequences. When the gunfire stopped, the true horror of the situation became clear. Shannon lay motionless, struck by multiple bullets. Her injuries were immediately fatal. The devoted mother who had worked so hard to provide for her children would never see them again. Jessic, also struck by gunfire, managed to reach his phone despite serious injuries to his torso. His 911 call, made with labored breathing and obvious pain, would become the primary evidence of what had occurred in those final moments. "We both shot each other," he told the dispatcher, his voice weak but audible. The statement was as shocking as it was revealing, an admission that their domestic dispute had devolved into something resembling a gunfight, rather than typical domestic violence. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but they were too late to save Shannon. Paramedics found her unresponsive, beyond any medical intervention. The mother who had sacrificed everything for her family was gone. Jessic was alive, but critically wounded. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize him for transport to the hospital, where trauma surgeons would fight to save his life. His injuries were severe, testimony to the violence that had erupted in their home. Police officers secured the scene, their investigation beginning immediately. The physical evidence told a clear story. 2 firearms, multiple shell casings, and blood evidence confirming that both Shannon and Jessic had been shot during their confrontation. Neighbors gathered outside, many still in shock from hearing the gunfire so close to their own homes. Children were kept indoors while police processed the scene, trying to understand how a marriage had ended in mutual destruction. The contrast was jarring for those who knew the couple. Shannon's social media showed family photos and expressions of love. Their public interactions seemed normal, even affectionate. Nothing had prepared their community for news that both spouses had shot each other in their own home. As Jessic was rushed to surgery, questions began mounting. What had driven them to this point? How had their relationship deteriorated so completely that both had resorted to firearms? The investigation would need to piece together not just the events of that evening, but the circumstances that had led to such a tragic conclusion. Shannon's children, unaware of the horror that had just unfolded, would soon learn they had lost both parents in a single, senseless act of violence. The woman who had dedicated her life to their well-being was gone, and their stepfather lay fighting for his life in a hospital bed. The quiet Fort Worth neighborhood would never be the same, forever marked by the night when a domestic argument became a shootout that claimed one life immediately and left another hanging in the balance. Fort Worth police officers arrived to find a scene that challenged their understanding of domestic violence. Yellow tape secured the perimeter as investigators began documenting evidence that would tell an unprecedented story of mutual combat between spouses. Detective teams methodically processed every room, photographing bullet holes, shell casings, and blood evidence. 2 firearms lay where they had fallen, both legally owned, both recently fired. The trajectory analysis would later confirm that shots had been fired from multiple positions throughout the home, supporting Jessic's claim that both he and Shannon had been shooting. In 20 years of police work, I've never seen anything like this, one investigator would later confide to colleagues. Usually, domestic violence has a clear aggressor and victim. This was different. Neighbors provided crucial testimony about the events leading up to the shooting. Mrs. Garcia, who lived next door, described months of increasingly heated arguments that had grown more frequent and intense. It used to be maybe once a month you'd hear them fighting, she explained. But lately, it was almost every week. Another neighbor recalled seeing Shannon looking exhausted when she returned from work that final day. She looked defeated, he remembered, like she was carrying more than anyone should have to carry. The investigation team reconstructed the timeline with methodical precision. Shannon had finished her restaurant shift at 3 p.m., picked up groceries, and returned home around 4:30. Jessic had been home all day, as was typical. The argument had begun sometime after 5 p.m. and escalated throughout the evening until the fatal confrontation around 8:45 p.m. Meanwhile, digital evidence painted a picture that contradicted the violence that had occurred. Shannon's last social media post, published just 2 days earlier, showed her smiling with her children at a school event. The caption read, "So proud of these amazing kids. They make everything worth it." Jessic's online presence revealed his ongoing struggles with his music career. Recent posts showed frustration with failed opportunities and financial stress, but nothing that explicitly threatened violence. Their public interactions on social media appeared normal, even affectionate at times. Text messages between the couple told a different story. The investigation uncovered months of arguments via text about money, responsibilities, and their relationship's deteriorating foundation. The messages showed increasing hostility, with both Shannon and Jessic expressing resentment toward each other. The financial pressure was destroying them, noted one investigator reviewing their communications. Shannon was drowning in responsibility, while Jessic felt emasculated by his inability to provide. It created a toxic cycle. At the hospital, Jessic remained in critical condition. Surgeons had managed to stabilize him, but his injuries were severe. He drifted in and out of consciousness, unable to provide additional details about the shooting. Medical staff worked around the clock to keep him alive while investigators waited to learn whether he would survive to face potential charges. The legal questions were complex. If Jessic survived, would he be charged with murder? The mutual nature of the shooting complicated traditional domestic violence prosecution. Both had fired weapons, both had been shot. Determining who fired first, who was the aggressor, and who acted in self-defense would be nearly impossible. Child Protective Services intervened immediately to ensure Shannon's 3 children were safe. The traumatic loss of their mother, combined with the uncertainty surrounding their stepfather's condition, required immediate placement with extended family members while legal guardianship was arranged. The community struggled to process what had happened. Shannon was remembered as a devoted mother and hard worker, not someone who would engage in armed conflict. The revelation that she had also fired a weapon during the confrontation shocked those who knew her gentle nature. If this story has you questioning how well we really know the people in our lives, make sure you're following along for the rest of this investigation. The truth about what drove Shannon and Jessic to this point will challenge everything you think you know about love, marriage, and survival. For 10 days, the case remained in limbo. Jessic's survival would determine whether this became a murder prosecution or a tragic murder-suicide. Hospital staff provided daily updates on his condition, while investigators continued building their case file. The Fort Worth community held its breath, waiting to learn whether justice would be served in a courtroom, or whether this tragedy would end with 2 graves and 3 orphaned children as the only lasting evidence of a marriage that had destroyed itself. Jessic Dawan Lacy Jr. had always believed his life was destined for something bigger. At 30, he spent his days crafting music in their Fort Worth home, convinced that his next song would be the breakthrough that changed everything. But the gap between his dreams and reality had grown too wide to ignore. While Shannon worked 2 jobs to keep their family afloat, Jessic remained largely unemployed, chasing musical opportunities that consistently failed to materialize. His SoundCloud account held dozens of tracks with minimal plays. Local venues rarely booked him. The music industry that he'd believed would embrace his talent remained frustratingly out of reach. He talked about making it big constantly, recalled a neighbor who often heard Jessic's music through the walls, but he never seemed to have any concrete plans. It was always about the next opportunity, the next contact, the next song. The role reversal in their household had become a source of deep shame for Jessic. Traditional expectations of masculinity collided with the reality that his wife was the provider while he remained financially dependent. Shannon's success at supporting their family only amplified his sense of failure. Friends noticed Jessic's growing bitterness during the months before the shooting. Conversations that once focused on his musical ambitions increasingly centered on complaints about his circumstances. He expressed resentment toward Shannon's demanding work schedule, jealousy of her financial independence, and frustration with his own lack of contribution. He started making comments about how Shannon acted like she was better than him, remembered an acquaintance. You could tell it bothered him that she was handling everything while his music wasn't paying any bills. The dynamic between Shannon and Jessic had become increasingly toxic. Her exhaustion from carrying the entire financial burden made her less patient with his continued unemployment. His shame about their situation made him defensive and angry. Each conversation about money became a battle over worth and contribution. Jessic's social media presence during this period revealed his internal struggle. Posts about his music were interspersed with complaints about the industry, about people not supporting local artists, about the unfairness of life. The optimistic, aspiring musician was being replaced by someone consumed with bitterness. The firearms in their home represented another layer of the tragedy. Both Shannon and Jessic owned guns legally, but their presence in a household filled with escalating tension created dangerous possibilities that neither seemed to fully consider. On June 1st, when their argument reached its breaking point, both Shannon and Jessic made the same fatal choice. Both reached for weapons instead of seeking help, cooling down, or walking away. The mutual decision to arm themselves transformed a domestic dispute into a gunfight with irreversible consequences. Jessic's 911 call, made while bleeding from his own gunshot wounds, suggested he understood the magnitude of what had just occurred. His admission that "we both shot each other" carried the weight of someone who realized their marriage had ended in mutual destruction. For 10 days, Jessic fought for his life in the hospital, while investigators waited to determine whether he would face murder charges. The medical team worked to save him, unaware that his survival would determine whether this case went to trial or became a closed murder-suicide file. On June 11th, Jessic lost his battle with his injuries. The struggling musician who had dreamed of fame died quietly in a hospital bed, his last conscious act being the 911 call that documented his role in Shannon's death. With Jessic's death, the case was officially classified as a murder-suicide. No trial would examine the dynamics that led to their mutual violence. No jury would weigh evidence about who fired first or whether either acted in self-defense. The criminal justice system could offer no resolution beyond documenting the facts of their final confrontation. The team at Truly Criminal Network discovered through court records that Jessic had no substantial assets to leave behind. His musical equipment was sold to help cover funeral expenses. The songs he'd believed would make him famous remained largely unheard, artifacts of dreams that never materialized. Legal experts noted the unusual nature of the case. Most domestic violence homicides involve a clear aggressor and victim. The mutual combat between Shannon and Jessic defied typical patterns, creating legal complexities that became moot with his death. Shannon's 3 children were left to grapple with the loss of both parents in a single night of violence. Court-appointed guardians worked to provide stability while the children processed trauma that no child should endure. The community struggled to reconcile the Jessic they thought they knew, the aspiring musician with big dreams, with the man who had engaged in a fatal shootout with his wife. His death prevented any opportunity for accountability, explanation, or justice through traditional legal channels. 3 children went to sleep on June 1st with 2 parents and woke up the next morning as orphans. Shannon's kids, ages 8, 12, and 15, suddenly faced a world where their devoted mother was gone forever, and their stepfather had died from injuries sustained in the same violent confrontation that killed her. Family court moved swiftly to establish emergency guardianship. Shannon's sister stepped forward to take custody, uprooting the children from their Fort Worth home to begin rebuilding their lives elsewhere. The transition meant new schools, new neighborhoods, and the overwhelming task of processing trauma while adapting to completely different circumstances. "Those babies lost everything in one night," said a family friend who helped coordinate their care. "Shannon spent her whole life making sure they felt secure, and now they have to figure out how to feel safe again." The Fort Worth community responded with an outpouring of support that demonstrated how deeply Shannon had touched those around her. Vigils were held at local churches with dozens of people sharing memories of her kindness, work ethic, and dedication to her family. Donation drives collected funds for the children's immediate needs and future education expenses. Shannon's former coworkers at both jobs organized memorial services that celebrated her life rather than focusing on the violence that ended it. They spoke of her reliability, her positive attitude despite obvious stress, and her unwavering commitment to providing for her children, no matter the personal cost. The tragedy sparked difficult conversations throughout the community about domestic violence, financial stress, and the dangers of keeping relationship problems hidden. Local organizations reported increased calls to their domestic violence hotlines in the weeks following the shooting, as people recognized similar patterns in their own relationships. This case opened people's eyes, explained a counselor at a local family services center. When someone like Shannon, someone who seemed so strong and capable, ends up in this situation, it makes everyone realize how quickly things can escalate. Social media became a focal point for discussion about the disconnect between online presentations and private reality. Shannon's posts had shown family happiness and personal strength, while Jessic's focused on his musical ambitions. Neither had revealed the financial pressures and relationship conflicts that ultimately destroyed them both. The presence of firearms in their domestic dispute raised questions about gun safety in emotionally volatile situations. Local officials organized community meetings about secure storage and the risks of having weapons accessible during family conflicts. Shannon's memory lived on through scholarship funds established in her name, designed to help single mothers pursue education and career advancement. The funds represented her values, supporting women who, like her, were working to build better futures for their children despite overwhelming challenges. Mental health professionals used the case to educate the public about stress, relationship dynamics, and the importance of seeking help before conflicts become violent. They emphasized that domestic violence can emerge in relationships where both partners are struggling, not just those with clear patterns of abuse. The Fort Worth neighborhood where Shannon and Jessic lived remained forever changed. Property values in the area declined temporarily as the stigma of the murder-suicide affected the community's sense of safety. Some families moved away, unable to feel comfortable after witnessing such violence so close to their own homes. 2 years later, Shannon's children were reportedly adjusting well to their new lives, supported by therapy and the love of extended family members determined to honor their mother's memory through their care. The story of Shannon and Jessic Lacy defies simple explanations. This wasn't a case of obvious abuse patterns or clear-cut domestic violence. Instead, it reveals how financial pressure, unfulfilled dreams, and communication breakdowns can transform love into something destructive. Shannon's life represented dedication in its purest form, a mother who sacrificed everything for her children's well-being. Her death serves as a tragic reminder that strength and resilience, while admirable, cannot always prevent the worst outcomes when relationships reach their breaking point. The mutual violence that ended both their lives challenges our understanding of how domestic disputes escalate. Both Shannon and Jessic made fatal decisions that night, choosing firearms over communication, violence over separation, destruction over seeking help. Their 3 children remain the living legacy of this tragedy, carrying forward their mother's memory while building new lives shaped by unimaginable loss. Shannon's dedication to their future continues through scholarship funds and community support systems established in her honor. The team at Truly Criminal Network spent months researching this case, examining court records, police reports, and community impact to understand how 2 lives intersected in such a devastating conclusion. If this story has moved you or opened your eyes to the complexities of domestic relationships, please subscribe and share this content. Your engagement helps us continue telling these important stories that honor victims while educating communities about prevention. Sometimes the most important conversations begin with the most difficult truths.